we're going to learn how Delta Force captured Maduro from a heavily fortified base inside Venezuela and examine the massive 150 aircraft air campaign overhead. Then we'll look at who's actually in control of the country now. The first thing you need to know is the American raid really started 4 months ago, with what's called Phase 1 shaping operations. It began in August when a group of CIA officers were secretly inserted on the ground into the country. They created intelligence packets that tracked Venezuelan President Maduro's movements down to the hour, and they operated a fleet of stealth drones that sent constant live updates, professionally stalking his position. The clandestine operation developed what's called a pattern of life, which is fancy intelligence speak for what we would call a daily routine. This way, intelligence officers narrowed down Maduro's location to Fort Tiuna military complex, the large base that lies just south of the capital of Caracas, where 3 million people live. On Saturday, January 3rd, 2026, in the dead of night at 2 a.m. local time, the U.S. government gave the green light on Operation Codename Absolute Resolve. The U.S. military launched a wave of targeted missile strikes all across the capital city. Oh boy, here I go toppling again. Bombs were launched from 20 different bases and ships. The ground assault element chosen for the raid was 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. And somewhat surprisingly, law enforcement from FBI agents from the hostage rescue team were also embedded alongside them to arrest Maduro. The bold tactics used for the insertion method shocked many military analysts. Reportedly, 11 American helicopters from the elite 160th SOAR Night Stalkers were deployed to spearhead this raid. SOAR is like the stunt drivers, but for helicopters, and they're loaded with like 300 special operators in the back. The team launched from the USS Iwo Jima Navy amphibious assault ship that's parked just a few miles off the coast of Venezuela. They flew low, only about 100 feet above the Caribbean Sea, to avoid enemy radar detection. Then they traveled the dangerous stretch of 10 miles over land from the northern shores to Fort Tiuna. They came under fire en route. One helicopter was reportedly damaged, but it was still able to remain operational. As the air assault flew across the capital, explosions erupted behind them, and it was uploaded live onto X. The operators used the MH-47G Chinooks and the MH-60L, which are special variant helicopters which have unique countermeasures. Then they approached the base, and the Ocean's 11-style raid began. Raiding this complex is an extraordinarily risky job to even undertake. Fort Tiuna has hardened concrete gates. There are pillboxes built into the mountain right there with firing positions on the high ground, armed guard towers, and continuous 24/7 patrols. It's sort of like Venezuela's version of the Pentagon. You can see here it's built right into the side of the mountain to give defenders the height advantage, as well as being able to dig deep underground. Its perimeter is pretty large. It's got about 2 miles wide by 4 miles long. Intelligence reports estimate that 5,000 of Maduro's most elite soldiers are assigned to this post. According to reports, Maduro constantly moved around the country, changing where he slept each night and throwing out burner phones to avoid being tracked to this location. But the base's defenses were defeated partly because starting in mid-December, U.S. Cyber Command laid the groundwork by targeting the power infrastructure, planting malware in their systems. When Cyber Command flipped the switch, it turned the lights off in the country, completely killing electricity to the base and large parts of the capital city. This cut off communications and made coordinating any kind of response extremely difficult. So the soldiers disembarked from the helicopters, the commandos hit the ground, and headed directly to the on-base house that Maduro was holed up in. U.S. General Kane said that the raiding force came under direct fire, which prompted American forces to respond with, quote, overwhelming force and self-defense, end quote. Intelligence officers on the ground with the team helped them navigate the compound. They provided intel to this breaching team ahead of time that revealed that there would be thick, solid steel doors protecting Maduro. This information came from sources close to Maduro's inner circle. He had a kind of panic room that was completely sealed off. So operators brought explosive breaching charges and buzzsaws, and they were prepared to break through. Meanwhile, outside, the American direct action penetrator helicopter laid down close air support suppressing fire. This is a special beast mode upgun version of the Hilo. It went weapons free with 2 miniguns and Hydra rockets. But then Hilo started taking fire from enemy man portable Igla air defense missiles. In response, pilots deployed their XM-216 Dark Flares. These defeat incoming missiles while staying invisible to the human eye. Delta Force finally breached into Maduro's on-base residence and found him. According to reports from CNN, who spoke to sources close to the raid, operators dragged Maduro out of bed, zip-tied, and blindfolded him while he was in the middle of sleeping. Then they led Maduro and his wife outside onto the Chinook helicopters and started flying back. Some Venezuelan military officer who gave away their location and was a source to the CIA just got $50 million in reward money. But this was only half the mission because the operators still had to safely extract. It was vital to the mission mandate that they capture him alive. If Maduro was somehow killed en route or during exfiltration, it would look like America had ordered an assassination mission, which would cause all kinds of additional legal trouble. This was one of the most geopolitically sensitive missions that I can think of in recent history. They had kicked the hornet's nest. The whole freaking country was coming down on them now. The question on every Delta Force operator's mind on the way back was, could they trust U.S. air power to cover their exfiltration? On their way out of Venezuela, the U.S. air power continued to strike strategic military installations across the country to create a diversion for them to safely escape. F-22 Raptors, F-35 stealth fighters, F-18s, radar aircraft, and B-1 Lancer bombers participated in the attacks. They hit bases all over in the states of La Guerra, Miranda, and Aragua. This was to create multiple dilemmas. This was achieved thanks to an air campaign that had been happening simultaneously overhead that achieved air supremacy. The operation reportedly involved 150 American fighter aircraft that had the goal of complete and total control of the skies. Fighter aircraft launched long-range precision missiles. Large explosions were heard across the capital. Local language news reporting stated that these explosions targeted air defense radar antennas. This was a massive seed operation, suppression of enemy air defenses. According to Oceanit Defender on X, good friend of the show, the air campaign destroyed Buck long-range air defense systems and knocked out all the armored vehicles at the bases. And since then, new satellite imagery has come out and shown the scale of the destruction at the base. Large parts of the base were entirely flattened. American jammers scrambled radar systems, and anti-radiation missiles targeted the enemy's S-300 air defense launchers. Not Putin furiously taking notes on how to do a special 3-day military operation with 69 hours to spare. The reason they were able to achieve this is because they struck major air bases, including the one at La Carlota and the Higuerota Airport, where Maduro's Air Force of MiG fighter jets could have launched from to intercept them. We see the aftermath of the destroyed armored vehicles on base here. Pulling together a response was difficult for Maduro's forces because Fort Tiuna, the military installation, housed some of the most high-level military generals, and once it was hit, it sent them all into chaos. In dictatorships, sometimes they keep all of their decision-making military officials central in one single consolidated location, which is useful for maintaining control, but on the other hand, it has the downside of a single point of failure or weakness. Explosions hit the port La Guardia, which is one of Venezuela's most strategically important ports that controls regime-linked money. These shaping operations were designed to cause confusions and disorientation in Maduro's forces, because what stunned military observers about this assault was that helicopters were the defining feature. Combat footage showed Marine Corps Viper and what appeared to be Army Apaches striking ground targets with rockets. And typically these rotor aircraft are vulnerable and exposed without ground support alongside it. There are relatively slow-moving and often easy targets, these helos, or even handheld enemy air defense weapons. The fact that they were used in this raid indicates how confident U.S. war planners were that they would have total air supremacy at this point. But the question is, why weren't any American helicopters shot down by some of the reportedly 5,000 man-panned Iglo launchers? How was the resistance so ineffective? There are several different theories and answers, and it actually takes us down a really weird, strange, almost conspiratorial rabbit hole. So strap in. The overwhelming combat firepower the US had amassed over the 6 months made resistance difficult. On top of that, polls show that Maduro was unpopular, with 10 to 20% approval ratings due to people being exhausted over Venezuela's economic crisis and the political repression in the country. So maybe few were excited to put their lives on the line for Maduro. Sources from Venezuela's opposition, however, told Sky News reporters that Maduro's capture was actually a negotiated exit, not a forceful capture, meaning they're claiming that Maduro actually knew American forces were coming to capture him and that he had agreed to it prior, and this ground assault was an elaborate way of him giving himself up to American authorities. Why would he do that? For domestic audiences in Venezuela, it theoretically looks better for him to say, "I was captured by the Americans," than "I cut a deal and left." It was surprising to experts that Maduro's wife was brought with him, because this is very unusual in rendition military operations like this. His wife was previously not criminally charged, and we only just learned that she's now also being charged after their capture. However, there is yet to be any actual hard evidence of this, even though a surrender may have been negotiated. His military troops would not have been aware of that, and it doesn't fully explain the poor performance of Maduro's security forces. US President Trump said, quote, "We were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so. We actually assumed that a second wave would be necessary, but now it's probably not." Another theory is that he was sold out by somebody high up in the regime, like his vice president or defense minister, who ordered his troops to not resist the capture of Maduro. The alternative for how U.S. operators successfully pulled this off without losing a single helicopter is it could be because modern U.S. helicopters have electronic defeat of missile systems. It's called direct infrared countermeasures, which detects, tracks, and fires a laser directly into the seeker head, blinds it, confuses the missile, doesn't know which way it's pointing, and that works against Igloo launchers. Those launchers require proper storage also and training, which they appear to have not had. The 160th SOAR flies low-profile flights as well that deny the enemy the ability to even see and engage them. According to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, the success of the mission was the result of months of planning and rehearsals. Either way, the helicopters safely made their way back over the nation, back to the U.S. Navy fleet, waiting for them offshore, where this photo was taken of Maduro. There were no American combat fatalities in the operation, although some troops were reportedly injured from bullet and shrapnel wounds, but nothing life-threatening. But now that Maduro is captured, who's in charge in Venezuela now in the aftermath? It's not as simple as a normal regime toppling that you might be familiar with. President Trump said that the U.S. government will now run Venezuela now in the aftermath of the capture of Maduro. He said this will happen until a safe, proper, judicious transition of power can happen. The idea here is that the U.S. naval blockade of Venezuela's oil will essentially, in theory, allow the U.S. government to control Venezuelan authorities, no matter who's in power there, without needing to actually put the boots on the ground. The U.S. government has stated they believe no further military action is anticipated in Venezuela. However, the resistance is forming in the nation already that could challenge this. Venezuelan Interior Minister Cabello appeared on TV in the street wearing a helmet and body armor, telling the population not to cooperate with quote-unquote terrorist enemies. Currently, Rodriguez was just sworn in as the acting president there, and according to the U.S. government, she's cooperating behind the scenes because she has no choice. However, in public messages, she's very defiant against the U.S. What we know for sure is that the Venezuelan government is in disarray at the moment. They called on the people to take to the streets, but so far it's been a quiet, muted response, not millions taking to the streets in an uproar. But how do the actual people, the population living in Venezuela, feel about all of this? Do they love it? Do they hate it? Something we don't talk about enough. Looking at the Spanish local news reporting of the situation, they report that the response from the people of Venezuela has been mixed, saying, quote, residents expressed shock at the U.S. military attack that left them wondering who was now actually in charge of the oil-rich nation. Some are celebrating the fall of the dictator. Other pro-Maduro factions are riding around with weaponry, angry at what they see as American imperialism. People are hoping that if Maduro is out of power, sanctions against the country will be reduced, and possibly the economy would improve. Others are skeptical of what will happen in the power vacuum. But was any of this even legal in the first place? When the US captured Saddam and Noriega, they had some kind of congressional approval. When the Libyan dictator was toppled, they too had some kind of congressional approval. This attack was conducted without any kind of notification or authorization. What happens to Maduro from here? Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Maduro would stand trial for criminal charges in the United States for narco trafficking in New York City federal courts. Maduro maintains his innocence. If you want to learn more,